the summer of 1998 had not been kind to Ridgewater, Alabama. The heat came early that year, pressing down on the tin rooftops and cracked sidewalks like something that meant to stay. Cotton fields outside of town turned pale and brittle. The courthouse square dried out by June, and the people who lived in the county's oldest buildings knew better than to hope for rain before August. But the worst thing that happened in Ridgewater that summer did not come from the sky. It came from a man named Isaac Mercer, or so they said. On a Thursday night in July, the Ridgewater Municipal Records Hall caught fire. By the time the volunteer company arrived, 2 of the 3 interior rooms were gone. The third collapsed before dawn. When the ashes cooled, a single body was found near the main vault. Isaac Mercer, locksmith, black man, age 44. Nobody in power asked why he was there. Nobody who might have answered was asked. Instead, the story that spread through the county was clean and simple and wrong. Isaac had broken in during the fire, looking for property deeds and title records he had no business touching, and the building had taken him before he could take anything from it. The family Whitcomb, largest landowners in the county, made sure that story traveled far, and for 22 years it did. Now Ridgewater had a son who carried that story on his shoulders, the way other men carried debt. Calvin Mercer was 47 years old. He ran Mercer Lock and Repair out of a 2-room building on the east edge of the commercial strip, the same building his father had operated from, though the hand-painted sign had been replaced twice, and the front window reglazed after a stone came through it one night, when Calvin was still young enough to cry about it. He was not young anymore. He was broad and steady and slow to speak, with hands so accustomed to patience that even the way he reached for his coffee in the morning looked like a man disarming something gently. He worked 6 days a week. He did not attend the county commissioners' dinners or the Whitcomb-sponsored 4th of July barbecue. He did not talk about his father at the diner counter or across a back fence. He had not talked about his father in years, because talking was not what was needed. What was needed was the right key. He had been waiting for it a long time. The Ridgewater County auction barn sat on the south end of the fairgrounds and smelled in equal parts of sawdust, machine oil, and old money, trying to look like it was just having a good time. On the last Saturday of August, the barn was full by 9 in the morning. Farmers in clean boots, retired men from the developments off Route 11. A few younger faces who had read the listings online and driven out from Montgomery hoping to find something overlooked. And in the back, large as a Sunday promise and twice as loud, Dale Whitcomb. He was 68 years old and wore it the way a man wears a good suit when he knows everybody in the room can see the price. Straw hat with a band of braided leather, belt buckle, wide enough to function as a dinner plate, shirt the color of something expensive. His son Earl stood beside him with a phone already out, already looking for the next thing worth capturing. The early lots moved fast. A tractor attachment, 3 commercial freezers, a serving kit still in its leather case. Hands went up, numbers climbed, gavel came down. Then the auctioneer paused and consulted his clipboard. Next lot. Safe recovered from the county property archive demolition. Fire damaged as is condition. No key, no combination, no warranty. May contain documents or may not. Buyer accepts all risk. 2 men wheeled it out on a pallet. The safe was not small. It stood chest high on most men, and had probably weighed close to 400 pounds before the fire took pieces of it. Now it was black and warped and wrong-shaped, its corners rounded by heat that had wanted to unmake it. The dial face was scorched beyond reading. 1 hinge had pulled loose. The door sat slightly cocked in its frame, permanently shut, permanently incorrect. The barn went quiet in the way that follows something that looks like trouble. Nobody raised a hand. The auctioneer waited. We'll open at $50. Nothing. Anyone? Purely a scrap. This is 80-90 pounds of steel. From the left side of the room came a voice that did not raise itself. 100. People turned. Calvin Mercer stood near the center aisle with his hands in the front pockets of his work jacket. He was looking at the safe the way a man looks at something he has been thinking about for a very long time. Dale Whitcomb's eyes found him immediately. "Calvin." He called it out like a greeting. It was not a greeting. "You looking to open a museum for scrap metal?" A few people laughed. The comfortable kind of laughter that does not need a reason beyond permission. 200, came another voice. And now the room understood something had shifted. Though most of them could not have said exactly what. Calvin looked at the safe. 300. Dale grinned. He was enjoying something. 500. The auctioneer's voice picked up speed the way auctioneers do when the air changes. Calvin knew what he had in his savings. $900 set aside over 8 months for a new scroll saw for the shop and 3 months of overdue liability insurance. He knew what $900 meant for him in a way that Dale Whitcomb would never be asked to understand. 900. The barn went still. Dale looked at him for a moment, long enough for the barn to understand the choice was being offered. Then he waved a hand as if shooing a fly. "Keep it. I don't take money from a lock shop to buy back my own scrap." He said something else after that. Calvin heard it. Everybody heard it. Something about how the Mercer family had a history of leaving burning buildings with things that weren't theirs, only this time Calvin was paying for the right. The laughter was louder this time. Earl's phone was up and recording. The gavel came down. Calvin walked to the clerk's table, paid in cash from an envelope in his jacket, folded the receipt, and put it in his breast pocket. He did not look at Dale. He did not look at Earl's camera. He retrieved a hand truck from his truck bed and worked the safe onto it himself, which took 12 minutes and left the collar of his shirt soaked through. Nobody offered to help. Some people watched. A few had already moved on to the next lot. When he finally had the thing balanced and moving, Calvin stopped and laid one hand on the blackened side of it, just for a moment. Then he walked it out of the barn and into the afternoon sun. He did not say anything to anyone. But if you had been close enough to hear, you might have caught him speaking low to the thing he was hauling, the way a man talks to something he has been looking for. "Come on then," he said. "Let's go home." Now, Calvin Mercer was not the kind of man who reached for noise when quiet would do. He had been raised in a house where the work spoke louder than the man doing it, and he had taken that lesson and made it the shape of his days. The shop on the East Commercial Strip was not much to look at from the outside, and Calvin had never seen the need to change that. Inside, though, it was arranged with the particular precision of someone who had decided long ago that order was a form of stubbornness. Every tool on its hook, every case of blanks labeled, the smell of graphite lubricant and machine oil so deep in the walls that it had become its own kind of comfort. He had grown up in that smell. Isaac Mercer had built a reputation in Ridgewater before Calvin was old enough to walk to school alone. Not a loud reputation, not the kind that gets invited to opening nights and ribbon cuttings, but the deep kind, the kind earned by showing up on a Sunday at 2 in the morning, when a family was locked out of their own house and not charging them more than it cost him to get there. He had opened locks for people who could not pay, and let them settle it whenever they were able, which sometimes meant they settled it in garden vegetables, or engine work or not at all, and he never pressed. He used to say that a good lock did not hide wrongdoing. It protected what was right from people who wanted what did not belong to them. Calvin had been 25 when the fire happened. Old enough to understand what the whispers meant when they started, old enough to stand at his father's grave and know that the town had already decided who Isaac was, and that none of the people making that decision had any interest in being corrected. He had stayed in Ridgewater because leaving would have meant admitting the story was true, or so it seemed to him. In the years since, he had come to understand it differently. He stayed because the truth was in the county somewhere, in a record, in a memory, in something that had not been destroyed. You did not look for a thing by walking away from where you last saw it. He had not known where to look until the safe. He moved it into the shop with the same hand truck, working it over the threshold, one careful inch at a time, and set it in the center of the concrete floor under the overhead light. The blackened metal caught the yellow glow and gave nothing back. Calvin put on his magnifying headlamp. He retrieved his listening scope, a second-hand model he had bought from a retired safecracker in Birmingham who swore it could hear a paper clip move at 30 feet. He applied a small amount of graphite to the dial mechanism where the heat had not sealed it entirely. He found a position, crouched low, and pressed the rubber cup of the scope against the side of the housing. He listened. The first thing a locksmith learns is that a mechanism is a conversation between designed intention and accumulated time. Every safe, even a ruined one, still remembers what it was built to do. The heat had warped the cam stack, knocked the drive pin slightly off-center, and fused the spindle in a position that would make most people reach for an angle grinder. But most people were not Calvin Mercer. He listened for 4 hours that first night. At 11 p.m., he sat back and wrote 3 numbers in his notebook. Approximate positions. Not the combination, not yet, but the memory of what the mechanism had been before the fire changed it. He also noticed something else. The mechanism had not been forced. No scratching on the wheel pack. No sign of a drill point on the door face. The safe had not been opened by anybody when the fire broke out. It had been closed, and closed correctly, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. A man who broke into a building to steal documents would have opened the safe and taken what he came for. A man who came to protect something would have sealed it shut. Calvin wrote that down too, though not in the notebook. He wrote it in the part of himself where he had kept his father's name clean for 22 years, waiting for company. The next day, Walter Briggs came by the shop. Walter was 74 now, moving slowly, his hands arranged in front of him. When he walked the way old men carry things, they are not quite ready to set down. He had worked alongside Isaac Mercer for 11 years before Isaac's death, and he had been one of the people who did not speak at the funeral, who had stood at the back of the church with his hat in both hands, and his face arranged in a careful neutrality that Calvin had never forgotten. He came in without being asked and stood near the door, looking at the safe the way you look at something you had hoped would stay somewhere you did not have to see it. "That the one from the barn?" Walter asked. "You know it is," Calvin said. Walter looked away from it. Calvin kept working, applying a second application of graphite to the upper wheel. He did not press the old man, because pressing was not the tool for the job. He had learned patience from the same father Walter was afraid to name. After a while, Walter said, "Your father had the best hands I ever saw work a mechanism." Calvin set down his scope. "Anything else you want to tell me?" Walter looked at the floor. His jaw moved once without producing sound. 22 years of a thing will do that to a man. Build it so deep into the architecture of how he breathes that it almost has a shape of its own. "There are people who lived real comfortable," Walter said at last, "off of that safe staying shut." He did not say more, but before he left, he turned back once, and what was in his face was not malice and not cruelty. It was the particular look of a man who has been cowardly for so long he has almost stopped knowing the difference between cowardice and survival. "You be careful," Walter said. Calvin turned back to the safe. "I always am," he said. The second night, Calvin worked until 3 in the morning. The rain came in around midnight, running down the shop window in long slow lines, and the sound of it filled the space between the careful click of the mechanism and Calvin's own breathing. He had mapped the cam positions as close as the damage allowed. The third wheel gave him the most trouble. Its surface fused at a point that no longer corresponded to any number the original manufacturer would have recognized. He approached it the way you approach a thing that does not want to be found, with patience you do not perform for anyone, because there is no one watching, and the patience is only for the thing itself. At 2:47 in the morning something shifted. Not loudly, not with any drama. A safe that has been holding for 22 years does not give itself up in a crash. It gives itself up in a sound so small you would miss it if you were looking for something larger. A small, tired exhalation of metal that had been doing its job through fire and time, and the weight of everything people had said and not said around it. The bolt retracted. The door moved a 1/4 inch in its warped frame. Calvin sat back on his heels, and put both hands flat on his thighs. He looked at the gap between the door and the housing for a long time. Long enough for the rain to change its rhythm outside. Long enough for the overhead light to feel like the only thing steady in the room. Then he got up and found his flashlight and his evidence gloves. He pulled the door open. The smell came first. Old smoke, dry paper, the particular sourness of metal that has been very hot, and then very cold, and then simply old. Inside, in the upper chamber, sat a tin box that could be used for deed storage, blackened across one corner but intact. Beneath it, wrapped in a piece of heavy dark canvas, was something else. Calvin took the canvas bundle first. He unwrapped it on the workbench under the light. Inside were tools, picks and tension bars, a feeler set, 2 tension wrenches, a small flathead in its own sleeve. Good tools, well made, their weight balanced in the handle the way good tools always are. The handles were copper. Stamped into each one, small and clean, were 2 initials. I. M. Calvin stood at the workbench for a long time. He had not cried for his father in many years. Not because the grief had gone away, but because grief, when you carry it long enough, stops being something that overflows and becomes something structural instead, a part of the way you stand. But standing at that bench, holding the tools his father had left inside a sealed safe in a burning building, Calvin understood for the first time, not just that Isaac was innocent, but what Isaac had been doing. He had been protecting something. He had gone back into the fire because walking away would have meant leaving the truth, where people with power could make it disappear. He had left his tools inside the safe as a locksmith's signature. This is who locked it. This is who trusted what is inside. Calvin set the tools down carefully. He put on fresh gloves. He opened the tin box. He found Lena Hart's number in his phone and called her at 5:30 in the morning. She answered on the second ring, in a voice that said she had not been sleeping well in years, and had long since made peace with it. Calvin. You'll want to bring your scanning equipment, he said, and whatever you need for preserving old paper. A pause. Is this what I think it is? Bring your equipment, he said. Come now. Lena Hart had been running the Ridgewater Ledger out of a storefront on the west side of the square for 11 years, ever since she came back from a larger paper in Birmingham, where she had spent 6 years learning exactly how much trouble a person willing to print the truth could find themselves in. Dale Whitcomb had threatened to sue her 4 times. The county commissioner's office had revoked her press access to 2 public hearings. A source she had cultivated for 3 years had disappeared into a consulting job. In Atlanta, 6 months before what they were building together could be finished, she had printed every story. She had the documentation to print and accept that the others would have to wait for the documentation to appear. She arrived at the shop at 6:15 with a portable scanner, acid-free evidence sleeves, and cotton gloves in 2 sizes. She did not say anything when she saw the safe. She put on her gloves and looked at Calvin for direction. Upper right, he said. They worked through the morning. The tin box contained a will, the original deed map, a letter, a ledger, and a sealed envelope. The will bore the signature of Harold Bennett, a white landowner who had died in 1995, 3 years before the fire. The deed map showed 314 acres in the eastern quadrant of the county, bounded by 3 landmarks that still existed. The letter was addressed to Isaac Mercer. Lena read it aloud in a low voice. Harold Bennett had written that he trusted Isaac for one reason above all others. Isaac Mercer was the only locksmith in the county who had turned down money from the Whitcomb family to open something that did not belong to them. He had put the deed, the will, and the documentation of the trust into Isaac's care because he believed that a man who would not sell his hands out to the wrong people was the right person to protect what the right people deserved. The will specified that the land was to remain in trust for the Ridgewater Freedom Learning Trust for no fewer than 75 years, and was to be used for trades education, community library services, and apprenticeship programs for adults who had been excluded from those opportunities. It was not to be sold to private developers under any circumstances. The ledger contained names, dates, transaction amounts, the signatures of 3 county officials alongside notations that made clear they had known the land existed, known the will existed, and taken money from the Whitcomb family to declare the records a total loss after the fire and authorize the sale. Dale Whitcomb's name appeared 7 times. His father's name appeared 4 times beside older dates. Martin Hale, the current county commissioner, appeared twice, listed as having received a payment, and signed a document certifying the sale was legally completed. Lena scanned everything twice. She made 3 copies on a thumb drive and mailed one from the post office on the south side of town before coming back to the shop. She did not explain this to Calvin, but he understood it. They were nearly done when the truck pulled up outside. Dale Whitcomb did not knock. He came through the door of Mercer Lock and Repair, like a man who had never learned that doors on other people's property had a different meaning than doors on his. He had his son Earl with him, and a man in a gray suit who carried a briefcase the way lawyers carry briefcases when they want you to feel the weight of what is inside. Dale looked at the safe, at the open tin box, at the scanned documents spread across the workbench. The color in his face changed. "Calvin," he said, and the ease was mostly gone from his voice, though he was working to keep what remained. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about what that safe contains. Those may be county documents. You may not have the legal right to open or reproduce them." Calvin picked up the receipt from the auction and held it out without a word. Dale looked at it without taking it. $900 does not give you ownership of restricted governmental records. Harold Bennett's will is not a governmental record, Calvin said. And the letter inside is private correspondence. The lawyer opened his mouth. Calvin looked at him. "You're here to tell me what I can't do," Calvin said. "I'd rather wait and hear it from a judge." Dale changed his approach. He was a man of considerable practice in changing approaches. The number started at $50,000, for the safe, for its contents, for Calvin's continued good standing in Ridgewater as a business person. It rose to $100,000. It acquired a new element, a commercial lease at a favorable rate for a larger shop space. Another element, a county business license upgrade, and approval for expanded services. Calvin stood with his arms folded. "You laughed when I paid $900, he said. "Now you're offering $100,000 for the same piece of scrap metal." Dale's face did something complicated. "The price changed," Calvin said, "because the truth inside it changed." Earl moved toward Lena's scanner. A man came through the shop's side door. At that same moment, Derek Collins, a retired county deputy, who had been Calvin's customer for 9 years, and happened to be returning a key he had forgotten to collect last week. Derek was a large man and moved without hurry, and simply stepped between Earl and the scanner without saying anything about it. Dale looked at Calvin for a long moment. The morning light came through the shop window and lay across the burned face of the safe and the tools with the initials on the handles and the documents that had survived 22 years in fire and locked metal. "Tomorrow morning," Calvin said. "Courthouse steps, 10 o'clock. "You have no idea what you're starting," Dale said. "I know exactly what I'm starting," Calvin said. "My father started it 22 years ago, and they killed him before he could finish." The room held that for a moment. Then Dale Whitcomb left. Earl left. The lawyer left without having opened his briefcase. Calvin looked at the tools on the workbench. He picked up the smallest pick, the one his father would have used for a residential deadbolt, and turned it in his hand once, feeling the weight of the burr handle. He set it down carefully. He did not sleep that night, but he was not the kind of man who needed sleep to be ready. Now Ridgewater was a town that ran on story, the way most small towns do, and what Ridgewater had learned in the previous 2 days was that the story it had been telling itself for 22 years was about to meet the thing it feared most, a second story, properly documented. By 9 in the morning, the courthouse square was full. Some people came because word had traveled the way word always travels in county seats, through phone calls and back fences, and the particular urgency of someone who has information they are trying not to appear too eager to share. Some came because Earl Whitcomb's video of Calvin hauling the burned safe out of the auction barn had been shared over 1,000 times on social media, and the follow-up story had developed enough over the past 12 hours that even people who had initially laughed now felt the specific unease of someone who laughs first and understands second. Some came because Dale Whitcomb had made 6 phone calls the previous evening trying to discourage attendance, and in a county where Dale Whitcomb's opinion usually produced compliance, his evident anxiety produced instead the opposite of what he intended. Calvin arrived at 9:50 with Derek Collins beside him, and Lena Hart 2 steps back. He had brought the safe on a flatbed cart. It sat at the top of the courthouse steps, its door open, its ruined face turned toward the square. Beside it, arranged on a folding table that had been borrowed from the community center, were the documents, the ledger, the letter, the deed map, and the tools. Each item in its evidence sleeve, each item labeled in Calvin's handwriting. And beside the tools, printed on a clean sheet of paper, was a single photograph. An old one, slightly blurred, taken at a church supper sometime in the late 1980s. Isaac Mercer, in his work jacket, laughing at something just outside the frame. Calvin had not meant to bring it. He had found it in a desk drawer the night before and put it in his jacket pocket without entirely meaning to. He said at last, next to the tools. Then he turned and faced the square. Dale Whitcomb stood at the edge of the crowd with his lawyer and Earl, and 2 other men Calvin did not know. Martin Hale had arrived and was standing slightly apart, the particular posture of a man who has not yet decided which way to run. Several county employees had gathered near the side entrance to the building, watching. Calvin did not have a microphone. He had a voice that carried because it was unhurried. 22 years ago, he began. My father, Isaac Mercer, died in the fire that destroyed the Ridgewater Municipal Records Hall. The people with the most to gain from what burned that night told this county that my father was a thief. They said he broke in to steal land records. They said he got what was coming to him. The square was very quiet. My father was not a thief, he was a locksmith, and this, Calvin picked up the smallest of the copper-handled tools, is what a locksmith leaves inside a safe to tell whoever opens it who put the contents in. He held it up long enough for people near the front to see the initials. Isaac Mercer locked that safe. He did not break it open. He was in that building to protect what Harold Bennett trusted him with, and he sealed it shut before the fire could take it, and he did not come back out. Martin Hale shifted his weight. A woman near the back of the crowd put her hand over her mouth. The safe contained Harold Bennett's will, his deed to 314 acres, and documentation of the Ridgewater Freedom Learning Trust. It contained a letter explaining why Harold Bennett chose Isaac Mercer to guard it, and it contained a ledger. Calvin set the tool down. The ledger has names in it. Dates, payments, the names of men who took money to call those records destroyed and approve the sale of land that was never legally available for sale. Dale Whitcomb's lawyer put a hand on Dale's arm. Dale did not move. From the far left edge of the crowd, where he had been standing since before most people arrived, Walter Briggs began walking forward. He was old and slow, and he shook when he moved now, but he moved with the particular determination of a man who has decided that the cost of continuing to be afraid is finally higher than the cost of being seen. He reached the bottom of the courthouse steps and stopped. Calvin is telling the truth, Walter said. His voice did not carry as far as Calvin's, but the crowd was quiet enough that it reached. I knew Isaac. I knew what he was doing that night. I knew because he told me, because he asked me to come with him, and I was afraid of what the Whitcombs would do if I did. He looked up at Calvin, then looked away again. I've been afraid for 22 years, and I let this man. His voice broke once and he steadied it. I let this man carry a lie that was mine to correct. I am sorry for that. It is not enough, but it is what I have. The square held its breath. Dale Whitcomb said loudly, This is theater. This is an old man with bad memory and a grievance. Lena Hart held up the scanner. The will carries a notary stamp that has been verified by the State Archive in Montgomery, she said. The ledger ink dates have been confirmed by a document examiner. The deed map corresponds exactly to the county assessor records from 1991. This is not theater, this is documentation. Martin Hale turned and walked back through the side entrance to the courthouse. Nobody stopped him, because nobody needed to. The documents went with Calvin to an attorney's office on the east side of the square before noon, and copies were filed with the state attorney general's office by 3 in the afternoon. Hale would find a different kind of door waiting for him by the end of the week. The investigation that followed took 8 months, which is fast for a thing that had been buried for 22 years. The county sale of the eastern land was vacated on the grounds that it had been executed using fraudulent documentation. Dale Whitcomb's development permits on that parcel were suspended pending the outcome of the civil and criminal proceedings. Earl's video of Calvin at the auction was entered into the court record as evidence of prior harassing conduct. Martin Hale resigned from the commissioner's position before charges were filed, which did not help him as much as he hoped. 2 other signatories on the original sale document were identified from the ledger and faced their own proceedings. The Freedom Learning Trust was reconstituted under state oversight and the land restored to it. And the Ridgewater County official record was amended. Calvin sat in the county clerk's office on a Tuesday afternoon in November and watched the clerk type the new entry into the record system. The old language, "Person of interest in suspected records theft," was struck. The new language read, "Isaac Mercer, locksmith, entrusted by property owner Harold Bennett with securing legal documents of public significance, deceased during the Ridgewater Municipal Records Hall fire, July 1998. The clerk printed it and asked Calvin if he wanted a certified copy. 2, Calvin said. He held one in both hands for a long moment. The paper was ordinary. County letterhead, standard font, nothing remarkable in the way it looked. But what was in it had been absent for 22 years, and its presence now had a weight that was not the weight of paper. Calvin folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his work jacket, the same pocket where the auction receipt had lived for 2 months. He did not cry, but on the drive back to the shop, he pulled over at the intersection of Route 11 and the county road that led east to the land where the trust would build, and he sat with the truck engine running and his forehead on the steering wheel for 4 minutes. Then he straightened up and drove on. A year and some months later, the Isaac Mercer Trades and Learning Center opened in a building of red brick on the eastern land. A building deliberately unpretentious on the outside and deliberately well lit on the inside, with wide tables and good tool storage and windows that let in the afternoon. It was designed for adults, for people who had been told too late, or had arrived at the county too late, or who had simply been too busy surviving to reach for a skill when the reaching would have been easier. It was not a monument. It was a place where work got done. In the main entrance, on a low platform where it could be seen from the front door, sat the safe. Its door was open. It was empty and lit from inside by a small warm light, and next to it on a mounted panel of dark wood was the letter from Harold Bennett and the photograph of Isaac Mercer at the church supper, laughing at something outside the frame. Beneath the photograph, on a piece of copper plate, were words that Calvin had chosen, and a metal worker from the county had engraved. A good lock does not hide wrongdoing. It protects what is right from the people who would take it. Calvin kept 3 things on the shelf above his workbench: the biennial receipt, $900, Ridgewater County auction, August. The copper-handled pick, smallest size, initial M. The scorched dial face from the safe, which he had removed during the restoration and kept for himself because it seemed right that the thing which had outlasted the fire and the years, and Dale Whitcomb's laughter, should belong to someone who understood what it had cost. On the day the center opened, Walter Briggs came to find him. The old man was carrying a small wooden box, the kind you keep photographs in, and he moved more slowly than he had the day he came to the shop. He found Calvin inside the entrance hall, standing near the safe, watching the first class of students come through the door. Walter held out the box. Inside was a photograph. older than the one on the wall. Isaac Mercer and Walter Briggs, younger, standing in front of the shop on the East Commercial Strip. Both in work jackets. Isaac with his hand on a tool case, and a smile that Calvin had not seen in any photograph he owned. "I don't know if I have the right to give you this," Walter said. Calvin took the box. He looked at his father's face for a while. "You should have given it earlier," he said. Walter looked down. "I know." Calvin was quiet for a moment. Across the entrance hall, a man in his 50s was shaking hands with the center's first instructor. Two women were filling out enrollment forms at a side table. The light came through the windows clean and steady. "But today is better than never," Calvin said. He placed the photograph in his jacket pocket, next to the county document. Then he turned back to watch the students come in. They were told later, the people who wrote about what happened in Ridgewater, that the burned safe had been worth nothing, and then had been worth everything, and that this was the point of the story. But that was not quite right. The safe had always been worth exactly what was inside it. The town had simply needed 22 years and one man willing to spend everything he had saved to find out that the price of the truth is almost never what the people who buried it claimed. They said Calvin Mercer had been lucky. He had been patient. Those are not the same thing. Luck runs out, patience waits. Isaac Mercer did not die as a thief. He died as a locksmith who understood that the right lock, properly placed, could hold a truth against everything the world threw at it. His son had understood that too. He had simply needed the right moment to listen. Thank you for watching. This channel is no longer supported by ads, and these stories continue because people believe they matter. Patreon is a quiet way to support the work with early access, story previews, and small moments of input before each tale is fully told. On screen now is a preview of the Patreon page. If you'd like to support the channel, the invitation is in the first pinned comment down below. I'll see you in the next story.